to you and we can just jump right in. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks everybody. Glad to be here. So as Mitra said, for the last year or so, we've been describing our best techniques for handling problem solving that comes up in teletherapy, especially teletherapy groups. And Laura, I've got too many squares on my screen to see. There you are. So Laura had the idea, let us record a mock group and allow all manner of thing to go wrong, and then we can actually sort of demonstrate how we handle that. So we're going to play these videos for you today. The main things we're demonstrating is how to manage problems that come up, and also a couple of strategies for using visual aids to engage group therapy participants. Laura, anything else we want to set up with before we just dive in?
No, I know many people have come back in person and are doing groups back in person. We actually at Chestnut Ridge are still doing all of our groups on Tele. So 9 months ago or 10 months ago, I would have said I was really bad at Tele and didn't like it very much. And now with Emily's assistance, I have grown to really appreciate the things we can do on Tele that we cannot do in person. Vice versa also holds true, that there are things you can do in person you can't do in Tele. But there are specific strategies that we really developed to manage some of the problem behaviors that you will see, as well as really utilize and emphasize some of the attributes that exist in Tele that make bringing in, say, media supports and information much, much easier and more accessible. So Emily is going to illustrate some of those.
So the questions we get most are about how do you manage the problems. So we're going to show that video first. So let me cue it up here for you. And I'm also going to issue a challenge. So I challenge you, if you can see all the little squares in our video, to see if you can detect the problem behavior before I talk to the person in the video about their problem behavior, because half of the skill that we have to learn is finding it, seeing it amongst the squares so that we can talk to people about what's going on. So that's my challenge to you. So we have a quick common problem medley video to show you, and you may see some familiar faces. So please let me know. Somebody will stop me if there is lag or audio problems, but I will just dive right in. Okay, so welcome everybody. We have some new group members tonight, so you guys know the drill. That means we're gonna do some welcoming introductions. So I'm gonna holler at you one at a time to introduce yourself. If you would briefly introduce yourself and tell us what behavior change goal that you are working on. So Laura, since you're at the top of our list, would you introduce yourself first?
I am Laura, and I'm trying to work on working less. It's not working very well, but that's what I'm working on. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much for going first. Olivia, I'm harassing you right off the bat today. I noticed that you had something there. What do you got there?
It's a vape.
So I don't know if you knew or not, but we will need to do that before group or after group and not during. Is that something you can tuck away somewhere?
Do I have to?
Unfortunately, yes. Maybe one of these weeks I can do my topic on nicotine and how it in fact is the most deadliest substance on earth.
Right.
Thank you. So let's see, Katie, would you go next and introduce? Oh, sorry. Hold that thought, Katie. Hey, Phil, where'd you go, Phil? Are you there, buddy? Hey. Are you able to stay on the frame from here on out?
Yeah, I had to run to the bathroom.
Great, glad you'll be here. If you guys do need to go to the restroom, just holler at me or put a message in the chat that you need to step away for a minute, just so that I know where you are, because if you vanish, we may have to boot you out of group temporarily and have you come back. We just need to know that everybody is here and present. So Sheena, just wanted to check on you. Looks like you might have some people in the background. So once again, confidentiality. Who you got there?
Oh, sorry, it's my nephew. I'll tell him that he has to go out.
Oh, thanks, Sheena. Okay, where were we? Katie, would you introduce yourself and a behavior goal you're working on?
Yes. Hi, I'm Katie. Welcome to the group, to the new folks. Happy to have you here. I am working on I just had hip surgery a couple months ago, and I'm working on PT. You can see the bike I've got in the background. I've been slacking a little bit on my PT because work has kept me so busy. So I am trying to do a better job of that every day.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
So trying to think of who we should come to next, but first, hey, Amanda. Hey, I noticed you're giving me whiplash over there.
Oh, sorry, I needed to get something.
So, hey, we were talking just recently, if you could just leave your phone there, like sit it somewhere, and then that allows you to move around a little bit without all of us kind of coming with you, so to speak. Let's see, actually, Amanda, while you're on the line, would you mind introducing yourself next and a behavior goal you're working on?
Hi, I'm Amanda. One of the behavior goals that I'm working on is connecting with somebody every day, because I'm either in a room or on Zoom. So I want to connect with people.
Awesome goal. Can we do a quick show of hands? Who else is working on that same goal right now in these connecting times? So Haley, I'm going to come over to you next. I noticed we're getting the extreme close-up. Are you able to tell what you look like on camera? I can do an impersonation. It's kind of like this. I wasn't sure if you could tell that that's what was happening. Is everything okay?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, it's no problem. Would you mind introducing yourself next and a goal you're working on?
My name's Haley, and I am trying to exercise more.
Nice. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. So, who have we not heard from? Sheena, would you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Sheena, and a goal I'm working on is trying to get up and move more during the day and not just sit at my computer for 8 hours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. How about you, Kayla? Would you tell us a little bit about you? Were you muted, or am I having some hearing problems? Well, I can't seem to hear you. Show of hands if you can hear Kayla. Anybody hear Kayla? Sorta-ish? Not really. Can you give it one more try, Kayla? Just let us know who you are and what you're working on.
I wonder, sometimes it's the headphones, like if you actually unplug the headphones.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I'm Kayla. I don't really know. I don't really know what I want to work on.
Well, so glad that you're here, and hopefully we'll get to know you better over the weeks. Thanks.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Hopefully we'll get to know you better over the coming weeks. Thanks for being here. Okay, who have we not heard from? Phil, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Phil, and the behavior goal I would like to work on is exercising more again. This COVID.
Yeah, I asked you twice, didn't I? Usually I have a list.
You didn't ask me twice.
Oh, what's again?
I just, that I've stopped because COVID's hard.
Exercising again. Okay, I see. How's it going? That's a tough one. So I think, Olivia, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Olivia, and I am trying to take activities and things off of my plate.
Luck with that.
Listen, I hear you.
Yeah. I have no advice. Are we supposed to give each other advice, Emily?
You are welcome to. Go for it.
I don't have any.
Helpful and productive. So Katie, I see the chat that you just sent me about what time this group is over. So it is over 1 hour after we get started. So Olivia just happened to notice that our previous agreement about you waiting till after group is not working. So what are some of the challenges of waiting till after group to stop smoking or vaping?
Oh, I didn't think you could see that.
Surprise. What's one reason it's difficult to stop and wait an hour?
I don't know. I just enjoy it. It's relaxing. And this is stressful.
Behavior change is stressful. Yes, you are right. Well, thanks for considering waiting till after group. If I see it again, we will have to talk a bit in more detail about what might work better for you. But thanks for letting me talk with you about it. So did we miss anybody as far as introductions? All right, thank you so much, everybody, for being here and welcoming one another. Okay, so that concludes the first video, these sort of problem behaviors. Laura, any comments before we see if there's questions?
Obviously, hopefully not all of those things happen in group all at the same time, but we purposely put many things in there at once, illustrating kind of the norming process that happens in in-person groups, and then it's a different kind of norming process in a virtual groups because there are different rules, or people think that there aren't the same rules when in fact there are. Like, you can't vape in in-person groups, but it feels different when people are in their own homes. And then, you know, how to come back and address the same behavior again without being a jerk. So Emily's really good at that. But it's not easy, especially if you as the group leader are feeling somewhat irritated by the person kind of ignoring or not adhering to the limit or the rule that you laid out. The other person I really liked was that like silent person that really won't talk. That often happens on Zoom, and in my experience is it's even harder to draw those folks out on video or on teletherapy. And you know, just how to give people space and then use the group to help to draw them out. So there was a little bit of that too.
Is it a good time to ask for any questions or comments from the group? Anything you saw that surprised you or anything you want me to clarify?
Feel free to chat it in as well. We can always read it off for you guys.
I think at this point, most of you have been doing this, right? So this may be the basics. So we'll move on to the second video, which is more of a demonstration of the use of visual aids in groups. So give me 1 second to pull that up. Okay, so thanks for listening, you guys. That's the end of the summary of the data that we have about what we believe to be desirable about marijuana and also undesirable. So thanks for listening. I know a lot of you have a lot of different opinions about this, but just thanks for listening. So who has questions? Any questions about this?
I'm not, like, this is the undesirable effects of marijuana?
Yes, this is everything we know about the downside.
Well, it's saying that it's linked to anxiety.
Yeah.
But it's like prescribed for anxiety. I mean, in states that it's legal, so I don't get that.
Yeah, like, I mean, it completely relaxes me and helps my anxiety tremendously.
Thanks so much for sharing that. So that is such a common experience that's what my next slide is about. Because so many people say, well, wait a minute, marijuana, smoking weed helps my anxiety. How can it possibly make it worse? So there's only one way I can explain this, which is actually by drawing it. So yes, marijuana can temporarily relieve anxiety symptoms, but the same as is true with other drugs, it takes from us more than it gives. And what goes up must come down. So let me stop sharing my slides here and start sharing, sorry, my slides here. Start sharing a drawing thing that will allow me to actually draw this for you. So sounded like at least 2 of you had this experience, feeling like marijuana makes your anxiety better. So you guys can, anybody who's had that experience, you can kind of feel free to holler out. But Olivia, it sounds like for you, there's a real connection here. So Olivia, let me ask you, on an ordinary day, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is your anxiety? Where 1 is like cool as a cucumber and 10 is you're like freaking out.
I'd say probably around a 6 or a 7 on average.
Okay, so we're gonna draw your baseline anxiety here-ish. So, and then what's a stressful thing that could happen to you that might make your anxiety worse?
Bless you.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, coming to group is stressful and trying to figure out how to do these meetings.
Yeah, so here at this point on your line, you have to come to group, and Zoom is like a nightmare, right? Especially where you live. So how high up would your anxiety go from a 7?
Like a 10 or 11.
Okay, so it would go all the way up, maximum anxiety, broke through the top of the charts. So that's probably a time where you might want to smoke, right? To relieve that anxiety. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna draw a super fancy little leaf here. And so how far, after you smoke, how far down would your anxiety come?
Like nothing.
0?
I mean, maybe like a 2.
Okay. So your anxiety comes all the way down. What relief. And then because of the way that what goes up must come down in terms of tolerance and withdrawal and all those ways that the drugs affect the brain, at some point it'll come back up to your normal baseline after that period of relief. One of the things that is so cruel about all substances is that it comes back ever so slightly higher than it went down because of the way that tolerance and withdrawal works. So now we're here on this line. Olivia, what's another stressful thing that might happen to you aside from a group?
School.
Okay, so school happens, like a test or just having to go to class?
Yeah.
Okay, so your
something.
School stuff, and how high does your anxiety go for school stuff?
8 or 9.
Okay, so not as high as group, but still pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of pretty high, that might be what you want to do when you get to that level of stress, right?
Yes.
So how far down would your anxiety come after smoking that time, you think?
Probably like a 2 again.
And then at some point the next day, your anxiety climbs back up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we could do this a few more times, but the more times you smoke, the more it comes back up just a slight hair higher than it used to be. And so what ends up happening is that after all of these ups and downs, if we track your anxiety, and there's actually lots of data about this, we notice that what used to be your baseline anxiety is now much higher. But you're having this experience where you smoke and then you feel so much better. And so this is the best way I know to explain how it's both true that smoking makes your anxiety worse over time, and also your experience is true that you experience relief when you smoke. So that is sort of the best way that I can explain it.
So just a quick sort of backstory on that technology that I was using. That is a free website called Sketchpad that you can access from any web browser. Anybody interested in that, I can give you some more details about how to use it. Zoom also now has within it like a collaborative drawing function, and there's probably lots more ways you could do that as well, but we're just hoping to kind of help you mentally take down the barriers of like, oh, in the old group room we had a whiteboard, it's a shame we don't have a whiteboard here in Zoom. Well, actually you do. And I think the toughest thing about it is bringing down our own mental barriers of allowing yourself to get comfortable with new technologies, which is kind of the name of the game, right? But if you allow yourself to tinker with some of these software applications on your own time, then you do have a whiteboard in groups. So that was the kind of main takeaway of that. Am I missing anything for that video, Laura?
No, and also just thinking about use of video clips like we're doing today, and use of music, accessing that you have easy access to everything on the internet to be able to pull into a group in a way that was much more difficult in person.
Yeah, anything that's out there. So we show TED Talks, and we show, someone says, how do I find online meetings? Well, let me share my screen where there's a web browser, and we're gonna search together so that they can actually see what they would need to do from their home computer. Any thoughts or questions about that whiteboard video?
Question, how many Zoom accounts do you guys have, or do you just share one? Because I think that's one of the limitations is, the free accounts obviously don't create all this, and there's a time limit, and in ours I've got it, and so it's getting the right person with the right Zoom account, I guess, to facilitate that.
Well, I think sharing your screen, to my knowledge, sharing your screen is available in any Zoom, no matter what sort of type of Zoom account you have. So that whiteboard activity is just a website. And so you don't need any fancy premium Zoom account. So I think you're right as far as like there are other things in the premium Zoom account that maybe you would need, but the whiteboard app is just a website. Laura, do you have any other insight on that types of Zoom accounts, or how many are needed to run a good MAT clinic?
No, it is nice to have at least one with like multiple features, but you can get around not having multiple features. We've been utilizing for bigger groups. We have a multi-family group, and it's nice to have breakout rooms, because if you have a group full of like 22 people, that's a lot of people, and breaking down into smaller groups and then coming back can be really useful. I think most of the groups that you guys do are a little bit smaller than that. So again, yeah, kind of getting around the fancy things by actually accessing them on the internet is a good way to not have to depend on fancy things.
I have a question. Those were great demos. Thank you so much. We're back pretty much to in person, but you never know what could happen. So it's good to keep learning about how to be able to facilitate. Did you have everybody off mute in the first group, or do you have any recommendation on that?
Yeah, so I think to me that is a group by group basis. The level of engagement, the level of maturity, the level of background noise, from where people are logging in. So I think as a rule, we've been asking people to mute themselves except for when they're speaking, but I've been in a lot of groups with patients where they know they're in a quiet environment. They know they're going to say something again here in a minute, and so they sort of leave their mic on. And as long as it doesn't cause a problem, we won't say, "Oh, put your mic back on." And so I've seen a real blend. So if the bigger your group is, and the more chaotic the individuals environments may be, then the more you might ask them to do that. But I would say it's okay to err on the side of letting them have their microphones on. And then if it's a problem, then you can say, "Oh, sorry, there's some background noise. We need you to turn that off." Laura, has your experience been different?
Yeah, and I've had to mute people quickly for various reasons because they didn't get to it quickly themselves. But it does, when people are unmuted, it allows for a little bit more spontaneity in the conversation. And that was one of the things early on that I just struggled with. I'm like, oh my gosh, you cannot throw out in the same way you can in an in-person group. How does everybody feel about that? Or what do people think about that? I mean, people will just stay silent for 15 minutes, whereas in a regular group, 2-3 minutes is a long time for silence. Zoom groups, people can stay silent for a long time. And so, yeah, I think it depends on people's ability to self-regulate their environment and, just and turn on and off their mute button with some speed. Yeah, that's a good question though. It depends.
Yeah, the style is so different as a mock group leader or moderator. The style, you have to be much more directive. So you can get group members to talk to each other, but you really have to direct traffic a little bit and say, "Oh, wow, Jennifer just asked a great question. So I'm going to see which of you has a good answer. Elizabeth, do you have a good answer for Jennifer? Mitra, do you have a good answer for Jennifer? Susan, do you have?" And you actually have to sort of direct traffic. And if you can learn to do that, then you can get people talking to each other the way they used to do in the room together. Actually, so I'm starting to have some nerves about going back in person, which is crazy because I did it for 1 billion years before we moved online. But one of my nerves is like, "Oh God, how do we mute them in person? I'm going to miss that." So we had one more video, but I don't know that we have more time.
Yep, we definitely have more time, about 25 more minutes.
Did anybody submit any group cases?
Laura, no formal cases, but we did send out a few reminders. So if anyone does have any just informal cases or comments, examples that they want to share with the group here, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, if anybody has any, extreme positive or extreme negative, or like, "Oh my gosh, this happened and I had no idea what to do," we are happy to help entertain those questions and help problem solve those situations. Because while we have many of the same common experiences, we can show the other video, but can I throw one out, Emily?
Yeah.
So one that we've had, which is of particular concern, is when people are intoxicated. So this is true in person, but in person, we generally have a protocol for how to handle if someone's intoxicated, and I feel like we can get them to safety pretty quickly. When someone is intoxicated, including kind of nodding out or unconscious on video, it is extremely stressful for the group leader and the whole group. We cannot, remove them and get them to safety in the same way we could in person. And so we've kind of developed our own protocol, and I'm happy to hear about how other people handle that as well. So I don't know if anyone has kind of an example of what you guys do when that's occurred. I think I've spoken to people who that's definitely happened in their groups. Dr. Morrison, that didn't happen in any of your groups when you were doing it?
I didn't handle it well, so I wasn't going to talk about it.
What did you do?
I said, you got to get off the phone call because you look intoxicated. You know, even they denied it, but I was like, even just being drowsy, I can't have you because it can be triggering.
Yeah, and in general, I'll say, if you can't stay awake in group, and this is in person or video, then I can't have you in group. You have to be able to stay awake and, not smoking and not driving, those sorts of things. So in general, that's when it's nice to have a case manager who can, I typically will text our case manager and say, hey, can you call this person? Because I'm really concerned that they are intoxicated. And I do tell them, you look intoxicated to me, you don't look well. I'm actually going to remove you from group, and our case manager is going to give you a call to make sure you're okay. The group gets very nervous about that. Usually the group is having like things in the chat about what's happening before I even, it's registered on my radar. We did take away the private chat feature so that patients cannot private chat one another, but they can private chat the leader. So they'll sometimes private chat, the leader of the group. We had some issues when they could private chat one another and the leader couldn't see it. So we did do away with that feature. And we have done, a safety check. So, the case manager has called, can't reach the person, and has received word either from the therapist or someone else in the group that they were looking so impaired that we felt that a safety check needed to be done. So we called the police to do a safety check. So that has happened also. So I don't know if anyone has any other kind of ways to manage that, but that was very scary and difficult when we first started out. All right, you want to show the other video, Emily?
Yeah, sure thing. Let me pull it up here.
Katie, congrats on 90 days in recovery. Great work. Man, you're having so much success. So great job. So anything you are finding yourself struggling with at this point in your recovery?
Yeah, it's getting easier to stop using substances. I thought it was going to be really hard, but I feel like the longer I go, like I'm not thinking about pills, I'm not thinking about drinking. But my husband pointed out the other day, he thinks that I have a problem. I've been spending money and specifically gambling more than I used to. It used to just be something I do from time to time. And because I have all this extra money now, because I'm not blowing it on substances, I'm getting a lot of those like scratch offs at the gas station and sometimes stopping at one of those hot spots.
Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that. So real quick, show of hands, who else kind of notices themselves picking up a lottery ticket or a scratch off or hitting the hot spot? Quick show of hands, anybody else struggling with that one? Okay.
You have any big wins, Katie?
I have. So I got $100 the other day, and my husband was pissed that I just turned around and spent it on more scratch offs. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad this is coming up today. This is actually not something we've talked about in this group recently. So this is actually really common where folks who end up having some issues with substances also have addictive type interactions with other type of things. So I actually have a pop quiz for you if you guys are willing to do a pop quiz here. Give me 1 second to pull it up. So there is an organization called the Institute for Addiction Study, I think, and they are currently looking closely at 10 different types of what they're calling process addictions, kind of meaning behavioral addiction. So you end up in an addictive kind of cycle, but it's not anything that you ingest. So I am going to see how much you guys know about this by asking you what you think the top 10 behavioral addictions being studied right now are. So Katie, we'll give you a freebie. Gambling is one of the 10, and it is actually the only one so far where we know sort of beyond the shadow of a doubt that this can become addictive for some people. So let me holler out to the group. What else do you think might be on this list?
Sex.
Bing, 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 bing. Correct. Who else had a guess?
Cell phones.
Yes, man, you guys are tuned in. So they call it, ooh, that's the wrong color. I guess it's fine, but they call it media. So they're sort of grouping a lot of things together: cell phones, video games, anything, TV, Netflix, like screens. They're kind of grouping all that stuff together. What else do you think might be on this list?
Food. Exercise.
Yeah, so food is down here. Bow. And someone said exercise. So once again, they're kind of grouping that into a category, calling it performance. So that could be exercise or other achievement type things. Some of you talked about wanting to try to work less. So, you know, some folks are sort of merit focused, and so that might be included in a category like this. So we have a few others. You guys want to holler out a few more guesses?
Pornography.
So that is a big one, but I think they are grouping that under sex for the research part. Last guesses before we call it a day?
Is like video gaming?
Yeah,
Is
so
that
that's
under media?
not there with media, yes.
Shopping.
What'd you say, Laura?
Spending or shopping.
Shopping, yes. Last guess is on the other four categories. So these two are related. This is relationships.
Oh.
And you may have been grouping that with sex. They're quite related. And the last two are ones, I've presented this to 100 people. Nobody ever guesses the last two. One of them is cults. They are suspecting that people who get involved in cults might be having an addictive type experience, and also
Politics. Oh.
rage.
Same thing.
Rage, Katie. Yes. So if we combined rage and cults together, we would have all sorts of things that we try not to talk about in group. So thank you for playing our game about behavioral addiction. So let me take this down so I can see you all better. So now that you've seen some of the top ones, anybody who's willing, would you be willing to do another show of hands? Who notices that they might have an issue with any of those 10 things on the board? So this is common. So I would say that it's common in any group of humans, but perhaps even more common with a group of people in recovery, because it's that same kind of button that it hits in the brain. So thank you for participating.
Here's another tip. If you're recording mock group videos, don't invite 10 of your best friends, because keeping the giggles under control was a challenge. Laura, what were you saying?
I just think, again, that's a good illustration of how you can bring in some psychoeducation and then go back to process. So I know one of the strategies that Emily uses is never doing one thing for very long, because people's attention spans is a little bit less on video, and there's a lot of distractions in their world, including like the people who are like this on their cell phone, and you can't really tell what they're doing, but you can sort of tell that they're not paying attention, or you could see like the flickering lights and they're actually watching television while they're in group. And so kind of switching things up, I think can be a great strategy for keeping people engaged. And just mixing up, the education piece with the process piece, which with the connection to one another pieces.
Yeah, I've asked people to think about a 1-hour tele group as three 20-minute groups, and try to do something different for each of the 20 minutes. Like one of them will have a visual aid, one will just be discussion, and one is something more interactive, and just, yeah, you can really see people trying to pay attention, and just their eyelids are just like, because they're exhausted and in the middle of a global crisis, just like we are. And so yeah, trying to think of that as some mini groups. Any questions or comments on that?
I think in thinking about, where will we be with teletherapy in 6 months? I actually anticipate that we will still have approximately 50% of our services on tele because our patients have really liked it. Not all of our patients, but a lot of our patients have liked it. Not all of our patients are able to utilize it appropriately. So I was supervising a student just before I got here, and literally like her kids are in and out. She's not able to pay attention. She's totally distracted, and she didn't like that either. And so, and I've also had a lot of like pregnant patients I work with say, I miss coming into your office because it was a break for me. It was a break from my kids. It was a break from my life. And I got to focus on just myself. So I think those things are really important and much harder on tele. But I also think that retention in some of our groups has been better because people could not get here. Transportation is such a struggle every week for people who don't have a car or don't have access to public transportation or reliable people to give them rides. So it may be that we decide, is this person better served by teletherapy or better served in person? And that can be really geared towards an individual person's needs and clinical presentation.
One of the
Oh, sorry, Emily, go ahead.
Well, I saw some people hop off their mics, but real quick, one of the reasons that I wanted to show that last video is to demonstrate that you don't need fancy software to do visual aids. That was just a spreadsheet, and I had a white text on a white background, and then just as they were talking, changed it from white text that they couldn't see to black text that they could see. And you could do that with a Word document or any document in your Google Drive or spreadsheets. And so you don't need sort of fancy graphic design skills. You can use anything. Katie, what were you going to add?
Here, go back to, so there, David and Laura have some great comments. Mine was just going to be a continuation of what Laura said, but those are good kind of questions and suggestions.
So Laura says she's had to address confidentiality on numerous occasions and basically kicked a significant other out of the living room. And so I don't know if you want to say anything about strategies to deal with that.
So we're just talking about confidentiality ad nauseum, like 16 times a day. We're talking about it. And once somebody is experiencing their sort of second week of group, as soon as we see there's another person there, we're sort of just logging them off immediately. Sometimes even before you say, I have to log you off now, you just sort of boot them out. So I think we're trying to do prevention of those problems by making sure people understand how we're going to handle that when it happens. And then sort of booting people out when it happens and letting them back in with the understanding that this cannot happen. And we're sort of just talking about it all the time. I mean, that's been my strategy, is just talk about confidentiality all the time and boot people out immediately as soon as you see it. And that's why you really have to watch and really be tuned into what's happening on all 12 of your squares. I'm going to advocate strongly, if these groups stick around forever, that we try to allow telegroups to be just slightly smaller. Even 10 people instead of 12, I think, would make a difference. And Laura, anything else you would do on that confidentiality?
Yeah, I know Dr. Marshalik, who is interesting to have done this with early on. So for repeat offenders, his strategy is take your camera and show me your room. I want to see who's in the room with you. So he, which initially I was like, oh, that feels really uncomfortable. But again, that was not the first line of response. But for people who consistently have space that is not confidential, it's really for the benefit of the group to ensure that it is. And so asking people to show the room is a strategy that I know he has used. And Dr. Baltiera asked about tardiness, poor connection, and allowing people to call in.
Yeah, so poor connection, I think, is the biggest barrier to tele. I've heard a lot of people talking about psychiatry teletherapy as if it's a subpar alternative to the real thing. And I'm like, tell me more about that. And what they're really describing is they couldn't do teletherapy because they didn't have the internet connection required. And so, yeah, I feel like if you have a poor connection, or people connecting just audio and not video, that's not really teletherapy. The reason that's a subpar thing is that that's not the thing. So yeah, as much as possible, using audio only connection as an absolute last resort if there is literally no other way to get them care. And same with poor connectivity issues. We can sort of excuse it if it's a one-time thing. Otherwise, we have to avoid that as much as possible. So there's people who had poor connectivity issues, and so we said, I'm sorry, you have to make your way to our building for group because we have to see you. We have to know you're okay. It's just not, it's not a substitute. So real teletherapy is a substitute, but that's not a substitute. So that we've just been sort of making arrangements for those people to come in person.
Yeah, and in those cases, it's not doable. I had a patient early on who wanted to do trauma work and her connection was really poor and she kept breaking up. It was so stressful for me that I said, we cannot do trauma work because your connection is so poor unless you come in. And I would love for you to come in and we can do some of that work, but we cannot do it over tele. It didn't feel safe. I'm sure it was stressful for her too. And then Dr. Baltier, I think, makes a good point. And supporting people who have childcare responsibilities to do the same thing they would have done if they were coming in person, which is, hey, can you get someone to watch your kids while you're doing telegroup, right? And they don't even think about that. And they don't give themselves permission to do that, even if they do have the resource, and many people don't, to have someone else watch the kids while they're doing their teletherapy, so they do get that good break. And then Dr. Baltieri also said, hard to regain confidentiality. We've had harassment of other group members by boyfriends, even just if for a couple of seconds. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, even when people are logging on, you know, sometimes patients forget and there'll be boyfriend here and they're like, oh, so now so-and-so's in group. And so they'll actually start messaging them and, you know, and it happens, I think, probably in smaller communities, and also our substance using communities are pretty interactive with each other. So it's not, they hang out in the same social circles. So they may have dated this person, or they may want to know about their significant other. Are they talking about me? You know, so it's not even what they say, just knowing that they're in the group. And that sometimes is hard because people will be running late and they'll be driving, somebody will be, well, hopefully they're not driving, the partner's driving, and they'll be on group, and then you go, who else is in the car with you? You know, and it really can create a lot of problems, and we've had to be pretty strict. But sometimes they don't always think of it as violating, they're just, it's just the start of group, but even just knowing who's in group is a violation. And so, you know, because they do have interactions with each other and history with each other, a lot of history. We've actually had some groups where people have shut down completely that had been in group for a long time. We're like, well, what happened? They go, well, you didn't tell me Billy was going to be in there. He stole all our clothes and he robbed us blind and this and that. And so we have to explain, we don't know that unless you tell us. We can't, you know, and so those things are to be aware of. And we've had, you know, people who have been in jail together, people who have gotten other people in jail, you know, there's all kinds of drama. And so just being aware of that, and then, you know, we just apologize and move them to different groups. But sometimes you don't even know, they just shut down and they quit talking and they, you know, they're just unhappy.
Yeah, and I think when people are in person and they're sitting in a group together, you can read that body language versus in tele, it's harder to know kind of exactly what's going on because you have limited nonverbal stuff that you're getting cued to. Sure, that's a good point. And we do encourage people to let us know about any violations of confidentiality. That happened in one of my groups recently where you know, somebody went back and told their boyfriend something, and their boyfriend, you know, exactly what you're describing. And she did come forward. And so we, you know, had them not be in the same group together and reviewed confidentiality again. Certainly people in small communities, their cousin may be in group and they didn't know. And so not that that can happen in in-person group also, but to let people know that we can try and create as safe a space as we can and move people to different groups where possible.
Jen, did you have a comment too?
The only other thing that I haven't heard you guys talk about that happened to us and this was in medical group, but we just handled it kind of the way you handled things in the first video, is people calling in from work. And in those cases, it was never a matter of confidentiality. They were off somewhere, but it just created a similar distraction to not having a person there, but just distraction. And sometimes the phone was wonky because they were walking around or whatever. And it's a really nice option for people who work to be able to call in from work, but making sure just everything that you've done already sort of applies in that situation too, which is making sure it's confidential and that they're in a quiet, still place, not walking through the warehouse or whatever. Through the cemetery.
Oh, right, there you go. Yeah, and the driving thing, we've gotten pretty rigid about, you cannot be in a car driving. You can't be driving yourself, and you can't be in a car driving with someone else. I don't care if you have headphones in. No, you can't. It's not confidential. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to get comfortable with Tele being a little bit nosier than you used to be. Like, hey, I noticed you're in a different spot. Are you just in the living room instead of your bedroom now? Or are you in a different house? Are you, and really sort of, you have to get comfortable being a little bit nosier, asking those questions of, yeah, can you show us the room you're in? Can you show us that nobody's there? Do you have headphones in? We've had a lot of people who do have the headphones in, but they have their hair down and you can't tell. So it is a lot. And I think the clinicians who are tired of Tele are the ones who you start to feel like a kindergarten teacher, and you start to feel really just like you're constantly nitpicking, and it can be tiring. But like Laura was saying earlier, this is the process of norming. And once you have gotten a particular client through those norms, then they can do it automatically, and they know what you're going to ask about, and you get to stop asking a little bit. And so it's the norming process takes a little bit longer, and you do have to be a little bit more nitpicky, which most of us are not super comfortable with. But you can, if you get comfortable, then you're golden.
I want to say, I think we, as particularly the folks on this call, I think we have done an amazing job this year. When I was in school many moons ago, it was never my intention to do Tele. I have an old paper planner. Like I'm not a technology person. That's not my thing. And all of us on this call at some point had to flip-flop into that this year. And for me, when I get frustrated with the patients, I also remind myself, they've done an amazing job. They had to flip-flop their treatment in a way that they'd never experienced before. And if I got to bark at somebody once because they can't hold their phone still, like that's I'm so grateful that I don't actually have to do that more often. So for me, I have to remind ourselves, like, I think our population's done amazing this year, having to put up with the things that we're putting up with.
And Dr. Morson's point is good too about, we work on teams and there's not always team consensus. So he said it's hard to get consensus on how many times and how serious infractions must be before recurrent violations kind of revoke teleprivileges. Yeah, and so those are some of the things we talk about in our treatment teams, and it's nice to have the option of, okay, this person is not functioning in Tele, we're going to put them in in-person group. At Chestnut Ridge, we don't yet have that option, but maybe soon, someday. And to have those conversations. I usually gauge like impact on the group. So, the group itself is the most important thing, not the individual. And if one individual is preventing a group from being safe, functioning at, as well as it can, then to me, then the person needs to be given treatment in a different form.
I also know that we had a resource that not all of our other sites and agencies do, which is we had the opportunity to bring patients in. So for folks that had, Dr. Baltier, you brought up, so for folks that were consistently tardy or had poor connection or could only call in, we have the option of, even though all of our groups are on Tele, patients can come to Chestnut Ridge. And so if we had a group today at 3:30 and 3 of those people could not access Tele from home, or couldn't do it in a confidential way or consistent way, we would bring them into Chestnut Ridge. We'd put them in the conference room where they were socially distanced from each other, had masks on, but they were accessing the room that way. So we're aware that we have that option that not all places have.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it is 5:02 p.m. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. But before we end the session and everything, Laura and Emily, were there any other things you wanted to just comment on or share with the group?
No, I appreciate the participation. Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah,
Well,
we have one additional content set of how to draw out a quiet group member via Tele. If you ever wanted to have us back to talk more about that specifically, we'd be happy to come back.
I vote yes for that. I think that would be wonderful, putting like a part 2 to this. This has been so wonderful. Big shout out to both of you, Emily and Laura, for putting this together, and also shout out to everyone else who is participating in creating that awesome video and that great outcome. So the only announcement I do have for today is that our next session will be on March 22nd, and Mark Garofoli will be discussing UDS urine drug monitoring. So keep an eye out for that reminder. And Emily, if there are any resources like that online sketchpad that you'd like me to distribute to the group, feel free to email that to me so I can send that out to everyone. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.